Well, welcome back. We're still here at the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum in Ashland, Nebraska. And in this episode, we're going to talk to the operations team. We're going to hear about the planners and the management that went on behind the scenes long before the pilots ever got in the cockpit. So stay with us as we find out how all that took place and how that communication made every SR-71 mission successful. All right, welcome back. And in this episode, we're going to be talking to some of the operational leadership considerations that went with the SR-71 program. And today with me, I have Bob Reeser, Bill Burke, and Barry McKean. And they all have different backgrounds in the SR-71 program, serve different roles, but we're going to hear about how the operations side and all the planning and really what the mission was about. What was the SR-71 mission about and how successful it was in that mission. So maybe to start, could we get a little bit of a background from each of you on how your journey, your aviation journey or your technology journey took you to the SR-71 program? We're going to start on the far end.
Okay. Well, I was a geography major in college, and
Okay.
I studied remote sensing and physical geography. And so I went into the Air Force, and I became an imagery analyst, a photo interpreter. And I was stationed at Offutt Air Force Base as a PI. And actually, I was in a class on synthetic aperture radar interpretation, and I get a call the day before the final, and they have a great deal for me. This is SAC headquarters. I'm at Offutt, and I get called up to a major's office, and I go into a room, and there's names all around the room, and they're doing assignments, and the great deal for me was a choice between 2 missile wings and a bomb wing. And I turned them down, called my boss, we had a little discussion. A couple months later, I get another call, and they have another great deal for me, but this time it was a perfect fit, because they were sending me to Mildenhall, which was being activated as a permanent change of station location. It had been a TDY location. So I ended up going to Mildenhall as the Chief of Collection Management, and it was my job to work out the objectives that we were going to be collecting, to coordinate in theater with the other collectors, because there were British and French collectors out there. There was Army, Air Force, and Navy collectors. We were SAC. And SAC has a mission to do strategic collection. And so that's how I got into the program. That's where I started the program. A little more background on myself. When I retired from the Air Force, I worked with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I was a senior analyst there. And I was liaison officer to the Deputy Director of Information Operations at the Pentagon, Joint Chief of Staff. So that placed me in the Pentagon on 9/11.
Oh, wow.
And so I got 20 years Air Force, another 16 years with DIA before I retired finally.
Well, that was, you had a lot going there. Being in the Pentagon on 9/11, that's got to be quite a moment in your life.
We actually, I had 2 offices, one on the 2nd floor in the Joint Staff facilities, one in the basement with the watch centers. So we were in the watch center, and I shared my office with the CIA rep and the NSA rep. And the CIA rep happened to be out of the room, and I get a call from CIA headquarters saying, "Hey, Bob, what's going on there?" And I say, "Nothing." And I'm looking at the monitor, and there's smoke rising from behind the angle of the camera, smoke rising from behind the old executive office building, which is next to the White House. And I say, "It looks like there's smoke rising from the old executive office building." Well, that was us.
Oh, wow.
The building is so large and so solid that the location where we were at, we had no idea we were impacted.
Other side of the Pentagon.
Okay.
And so it was complete chaos on one side, evacuating people. It was an orderly evacuation on the other side. And since I was in the basement watch areas, it's a little like Get Smart, where you got a lot of different offices to go through. We had to secure everything we were dealing with, seal our vault, go through another vault, seal that one, go through another vault, seal that one, before we could get out to the corridor, seal that off, and evacuate the building. So it was, you know, I didn't have a chance to call my wife. I got one phone call off to the DIAC, which is located on the other side of the Potomac River. My boss was actually there. Tell him we're leaving. Get outside, and everybody's trying to call home at the same time. All the cells weren't working, so the only way a call could get out is if somebody happened to get a call in, you just pass the phone around.
Okay.
So it was an eventful day.
Yeah, really.
Oh my gosh. You know, I would have never thought about that, to your point, that it's just so solid. It looks pretty solid from the outside, and that took place on one side, and you were just business as usual.
No.
Yeah. And we returned the next day. We were, of course, setting up task forces. My CIA counterpart was deployed to Afghanistan. We were on a war footing. And it took the fire department about a week to get the fire out that was burning in the attic. So the attic was burning while we were working down below. And the watch center never left the building. And the alternate watch centers were set up, so nothing ever, no misbeat whatsoever.
Okay.
Amazing.
So,
Well, that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So, Bill, how did you find yourself in the cockpit of an SR-71?
It all started ancient ago. No, I grew up as a kid in Miami, Florida, and my first real passion, if you will, or awareness of flying was, playing in the backyard, and Eastern Airlines with the little blue and light blue stripe but down the side. Every time I'd hear a jet engine, I would look up. I mean, it just became an automatic reaction. And so I got so enamored just with that constant flow of traffic going by. I thought, that looks interesting. But off through high school and then into college, went to Air Force ROTC, largely because my dad was trying to keep me out of trouble. Well, he wasn't completely successful, but, but he did give me some great guidance. So I went into the Air Force ROTC. In there, we had a lieutenant colonel who was part of the administration there, and he had to keep currency, so he would go down to Tyndall every Friday and fly T-33s as a target drone for the 104s and the 105s, or the 105s and 106s to shoot at and stuff. So I'd skip school every Friday and go with him down to Tyndall, and they throw me in a flight suit and shove me in the back seat. And so I got to fly 25, 30 hours worth of T-33 flying. Plus I got, my first emergency was an RB-57, and some young captain in the front seat just getting currency. And we take off, and he raises the gear, and I hear, uh-oh. And I said, anything? And he said, well, look down to your left. Is there a really large book there? And I said, yes. So he pulled it out, and he says, go to landing gear failure to retract. And so I started reading to him as he's orbiting around Tyndall. Finally, we're ready to come in, and his last thing was, if I tell you to bail out, you're only going to hear it once. So I said, great. What he forgot to tell me is the B-57, which I had no time in, lands and has a very nose-down, short forward nose gear. And it kept coming down, and it kept coming down, and as the further it got down, the closer my hands got to the triggers. But we landed, we stopped, we pulled off. So, those kind of experiences kind of led to, I've got to go do this. So fortunately, out of college into pilot training, this is just as Vietnam's drawing down in 71, 72. So I was fortunate enough to get a no-kidding airplane, because a lot of guys were getting commissary officer and O-Club officer and non-rated jobs. And I went right into the T-38 and became a 38 instructor. Did that for 3 years, and then got selected to go straight to the left seat on the KC-135. And so I got checked out in the Boeing 707. and had an all-bachelor crew, so I spent 3 years pretty much either in England or in Guam or places like that. Came out of that, actually I'm sitting on alert on the 135, it's snowing outside up in Minot, and I see an article in the Air Force Times newspaper saying, do you want to be a U-2 pilot? I had no idea what that was. I quick looked up U-2 and said, yeah, it might be interesting. I called them up, and the guy that answers the phone was a guy named Fred Kishler. We flew T-38s about 3 years prior together. I said, Fred, he said, what's going on? He said, dude, you got to come see this. So he got me an interview, went out and looked at and this was right about that 8-year point where it's either time to get out and go with the airlines or commit to
a long-term.
to a long-term career. So part of the U-2, they do give you a quickie flight in the pattern just to see if you're going to be able to learn to land the airplane. Airplane was a beautiful airplane to fly except for the last 10 feet because it was a powered glider. So the challenge was taking it down to 10 feet and slowly getting down to the point where you hit tail first and fully stalled and bring it to a stop. So I got accepted for that, right back to Minot Air Force Base, told my squadron commander. I had just been sent to instructor school at Castle, and so I'd been back only instructing for probably a couple months. And he said, well, we've just spent a lot of money on you, so I'm sorry, you're going to have to stay here the full year. And I had orders within a week to go to Beale and start training on the U-2. I'm very, very lucky to fly the U-2 for 3 years. At that point, 2 of the SR guys were out jogging one day in Yuba City, Maury Rosenberg and Jack Veth. And some Yahoo came off the road in a pickup truck and hit them both.
I heard this story. Some
Jack
tragic...
Veth never flew again. Maury flew maybe 6 months later in the 38 and then got requalified in the SR. And but that day when they got hit, 2 of the SR pilots came to me and said, you know, Bill, if you ever wanted to fly the SR, this would be an awesome day to apply. And so I went home, quick typed out an application, sent it in that afternoon. Had an interview with the wing commander the next morning, and by noon I walked across the hall and started SR-71 training.
Oh, wow.
And I do joke periodically that I had to get rid of the pickup truck, but it was well worth the chance. And I told Maury Rosenberg this story, and I thought he was going to die laughing. But yeah, so right into the SR, and very, very fortunate. Got to.
And what year was that?
This was now 1981.
Okay.
And so I stayed with the SR through 1985. Then I got selected to the staff job. I went to pretty much the same place where Bob was on the Joint Reconnaissance Center, J3 operations on the JCS. So we handled all sensitive reconnaissance operations for all services, and especially the most sensitive ones. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time at the Pentagon. It was really a fascinating place to work. From there, it was now 2 years to retirement. We had just gone down to Patrick Air Force Base for a staff visitation, and I went in and talked to the DO at an organization called AFTAC, Air Force Technical Applications Center. They handle all nuclear collection operations, and they needed a DO, if you will, for the airborne side of the house. And so I got selected for that. Off the family went to Cocoa Beach, Florida at Patrick Air Force Base, and I spent my last 2 years there. After that, it was off into the real world, and I was fortunate enough to get picked up and by American Airlines and flew 22 years with American.
Oh, did you? Okay, so there's a commercial run there.
I flunked, after that, I flunked retirement 2 or 3 times. And my most fun thing to do in that post-military or airline flying was flying low-wing Pawnee agriculture type spray airplanes that had been converted to picking banners. So
Oh, really?
I spent a year down on South Beach at 500 feet right off the beach, dragging banners up and down, advertising
wow.
all the bars and all the guys that loved their wives. And, and after that, COVID was coming up, so that pretty much terminated my flying career.
Right, right. Wow. Well, I want to hear a little bit. I am interested in the relationship between the flying YouTube and YouTube. How about YouTube or YouTube? And the SR-71. But Barry, what's your timeline? Because it just gets better.
It's interesting. I can't match that. I can't grow the hair that
Well,
well.
no, I mean, he's got the hair thing going there.
Yeah.
COVID, I was bored.
I was raised on a farm, right, not too far from where we are right now in Iowa,
Okay.
dairy farm and everything. And we had several friends of the family who were World War II pilots. One flew 17s and the other was 24s. And I remember vividly all the stories they would tell. One of them got shot down, and they gave me some of their hats and the equipment and everything. And I just always was fascinated by flying. And unlike Bill, where he heard jets, I was out in the country, and all I saw was props that would go over. But I would love to see airplanes, and I just said, man, that's fascinating to me. I wanted to do it bad, but so I went to, graduated from high school and then college at the University of Iowa. And while at Iowa, I was walking through the Union one day, and this guy said, "Psst, buddy, you want to fly jets?" And I said,
Was he like around a corner or something?
yeah, it was two Navy guys that were recruiters. I said, I'd love to, but I got bad eyes and I can't be a pilot. And he said, well, we can make you a navigator. And I didn't have a clue what that really was. And so they flew me from here it is in Iowa into Glenview Naval Air Station in Chicago to go through a battery of tests and stuff. And so I said, well, this is pretty good stuff. And they said, you'd make a great navigator. And so I signed up for the Navy to do it, and they recommended I join the reserves while I was in it. So because I still had a couple of years to finish in college. And so I did, and got the little 13-button pants and all that good stuff. And one of my requirements as part of the Navy was I had to go be on a destroyer for a couple of weeks up in Seattle. Well, this was when Vietnam was cooking off about that time, and these guys had one of them, the chief that was on board, had just gotten back from there, and he knew I was going to Pensacola for flight training down for the Navy, and he was saying, "You're going to love carrier life. It's just going to be great. 5,000 guys out to sea for 6 months." And none of that sounded real attractive to me, so I went back and talked to the Air Force recruiter, and I said, "Would you take a warm body?" And he said, and again, this is mid-60s, so they were taking anything that could bleed or breathe. And so I joined over into the Air Force and went to nav school. From there, that was in California, Sacramento, and my first assignment happened to be at Beale, which is 60 miles north or 50 miles north of Sacramento. And it was B-52s, and this was in 60. I got there after all the nav and got the wings and went to nav bomb training. And it was like 18 months total, but I finally got up there in about 67, I guess it was. And that was about the time they were bringing in the first SRs into Beale and bedding them down there. So I was just all excited about going over and doing that. So I went over and knocked on the door and talked to the SR-71 squadron commander. And I said, I'd love to fly your jet. And he was, Lieutenant, go get some time and then we'll consider that option. And he said, go get some high performance and all that good stuff. So I spent 5.5 years still flying the B-52, had a tour in Vietnam and all that, and came back. And then went to the 111, FB-111 for Plattsburgh, New York, and had a great tour. Loved the airplane, particularly as a navigator. You had a window and a stick, and you got to fly and all that. So it was a great airplane. I only flew it, unfortunately, for about 3 years and got selected to go to a staff job. Left that, and while I was on the staff job, it was a headquarters staff job, but it was located in Fort Worth, Texas. We made all the training films and stuff for the Strategic Air Command. While I was on one of my site visits, it was out at Beale. I ran into a buddy of mine, Bruce Liebman, was the ops officer in the squadron, the SR guy. And he and I had gone through nav school together. And he says, "You got to get your name in here." And I said, "Well, now I'm probably too old." And he said, "Oh, no." So I ended up putting my application in, and lo and behold, I was fortunate enough to, as they all say, it's just luck of the draw that you're picked over some other guy. And so I got picked for it, went out there in '78, got to be flew it, paired up with the best pilot I could ever imagine, Lee Sheldon. He was a former 111 guy as well. Unfortunately, he died several years back. But we had a great time flying for 3.5, 4 years. And then they selected me to be the operations officer for the squadron. And that was on one of the few outfits in the Air Force, I think, that where you, as the ops officer, you don't get to fly anymore. So I was hesitant to whether I wanted to take it because I enjoyed the flying. But anyway, I took that job, and in so doing, they were, as Bob was saying, they opened up the detachment in RAF Mildenhall in England to a full-time operation. And a good buddy of mine was selected as the commander, and he asked if I'd like to join him over there and be the director of operations, they called the position. It's like ops officer. And I said, God, I'd love it, because first of all, I loved England. We'd gone over there numerous times, TDY, and I couldn't wait to get back there. And it was just a dream come true. So I went over, served for a couple of years, and then it was time to get Jay out of there. And fortunately, the wing commander saw it the way I did and just kind of moved me up. So I was the first navigator, I think, to be a commander of a SAC unit, and it worked out nice. I got to be there for a couple of years as the commander of the place. Had some great tours, and Bob and I got involved in some wonderful issues with like Libya and all that good stuff. Came back, it was time to rotate back, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do and go to Pentagon or where. It was kind of a pick your choice. And Lee, my pilot, was up there at the time, and he said, if you want to make colonel, he said, this is not the place to come because when you're brand new. He said, there's a lieutenant colonels floating all over this place. So he said, go get someplace else that'll give you a better opportunity. Well, lo and behold, there was an opening at headquarters at Logistics Command, Air Force, AFLC, Logistics Command. I couldn't spell logistics when I got there, but it turned out I was the SR program manager for that. And the beauty of it was that's where all the money came from, the Pentagon down to us, and then we farmed it out for all the different programs that we had. Besides, we had the U-2, the SR, the RC, a bunch of Special Forces 130. So it was a great, great job. Loved it, and fate would have it, I got promoted, so it was well worth the opportunity. Moved out of there after about almost 6 years. That was good times, and went down to Texas knowing I wasn't going to be a general. So I followed my wife, who was in the Air Force as well, and she was having a great career. So I went down to Texas, got an opportunity to get out and go to work for another SR guy who was down there, Steve Stenson. You remember him way back? Anyway, he had a little civilian job he had down there. Became director of an office of a bunch of engineers working Air Force contracts. And so I worked there. And while I was there was the reactivation period for the SR when I started it back up, because it had shut down in 89, 90 time frame. And this was like 92, and we did it. We had 2 airplanes that were probably the best they'd ever been. We added a data link to it, which was phenomenal. We took an old U-2 data link and strapped it on the bottom of the airplane. It worked. We were able to we had the best radar system in the world, is ASARs. The quality on it was just phenomenal. But the problem is we had to collect the data, go back, process it, and disseminate it. Well, that's time. With this data link, we were able to get an onboard processor for the radar system, downlink it we processed it and then downlinked the image. And we had done it with a couple of exercises with the Army. They would simulate, and they'd call up to a jet that was flying by and say, we need to know what's over this hill, give us here's the coordinates. And we would shoot it with the radar, process it, boom, download it. So in less than 5 minutes, the user who really needed the information had the data in front of him. So it was a great airplane at the time. And unfortunately, the Air Force or somebody thought better that they didn't need this program, so they canceled it. And so I said, enough, I've had enough. So I moved out to Phoenix and dry heat and loved it. And still there, been there 26 years. it was a good time. I love my flying time in the airplane, but didn't get enough of it.
Wow, wow. Wonderful. Thanks for those recap. I use the term recap, that's not even fair. Those history of great flying and opportunities. Help me as a person who wouldn't know how you plan for missions. How does that all take place? What does the process look like? I'm not sure who I'm asking there.
Bob puts it all
No, I
together.
was going to
So
say
maybe
Bob
you
is
can
the
start-
instigator.
He's the man that
so-
built it. We just executed
Yeah.
it.
These guys really were working for me.
Okay. Well, that's how I thought would be the case. But when I think of operations, and I'll let you get the stage here, but I'm thinking about, you're doing kind of a lot of the back office planning, getting everything ready. Because everything I've heard about your operations is you're very well organized with, tanker refuelings and all the logistics of politics and where you're flying and where you can't fly and all that type of stuff. So I'm kind of curious how that process starts.
Yeah, it takes a lot of coordination because you have planning on from the operations side, the aircraft and the maintenance and planning the routes and things like that. And you have planning on the intel side, the objectives that are going to be collected and where you're going to go and the timing and such. And you got to meld those together. And so when it's decided we're going to go into a region, the operators will plan the track. And the intel side will plan the sensor actions. And they'll be merged together. Let me, I should have pulled this out earlier. I'll show you what, at the time, you got to remember.
This was designed in the 60s.
Right.
Yeah, let's see if I can.
While he's digging that out, I was going to say, I got to see, this side of it when I was working in the Joint Reconnaissance Center, because you get the request from CIA, DIA, NSA, whatever the source or the service, and it would go into DIA, and they would pick what's the best platform, is the risk worth the gain, all that stuff, and then they'd be building the tasking on what the targeting is and all that. So that, as an operator flying the airplane, we're just chicken rudder guys, but these are the guys that really orchestrate everything that needs to come together to prosecute a target.
And one of the quick takeaways on that, for me, as I listen to that, is so somebody calls in an order for, I need something.
Yep.
And then the team then decides what's the best platform and the aircraft and whatever it may be to capture that.
Right.
Air Force, Navy, satellite, whatever.
Data cards. This is how we entered every, the route for the SR-71 and every sensor action and the timing, the refuelings, all the locations had to be entered on a key punch machine. And you're talking hundreds of cards. And they'd be entered into an IBM computer, read out, and you'd get a tape. And the tape would go into the ANS computer. And the ANS computer, the gyros would be set to the magnetic field at the time. The ANS computer would update from star shoots and would keep the SR-71 on track. So this was something that the ops side and the intel side each were putting together, and then it would be melded into one one tape to be input into the computer. And that would keep the SR on track within 300 feet. And the locations we were flying, if you were off slightly, you might miss a target. And if you're off in another direction, you might get shot down because you're overflying. There'll be an international incident. And at the time we were operating at Mildenhall in the mid-80s, early 80s, late 80s, Soviets had SA-5s that could shoot up to 120,000 feet, could travel at more than Mach 4. You had MiG-25s that they attempted to get up to the same altitude. They weren't as capable as the SR. So there were threats there. And the targets that we were going after were valuable targets, so we needed to make sure we were on track and could collect what we needed to do. So we've got several systems on board. We had a radar system. If we're looking at locations where there be cloud covered and be obscured and you need to be able to look through, we'd use the radar. We also had optical systems. We had the optical bar camera, which was in the nose of the aircraft, so we'd take the radar nose off and put the optical bar camera nose on, and we'd be able to get what we call synoptic imagery. It would be as a panoramic image, and we could literally cover an entire country, an entire battlefield in one go. So we could look down and we could see where everything is. And, we also carried a technical objective camera in the side bays, and these were framing cameras, and we could look at specific targets and get high resolution imagery with those framing cameras. We carried an electronic system which worked much like a vacuum cleaner and would suck up all the signals, electronic signals, that we'd go through an area. We'd literally turn it on and sweep through the entire area to collect everything. This was important because we wanted to get the acquisition radars and the targeting radars, the signals, so we could develop defensive systems. SAC was interested in this because their bombers are going to go over the same territory, but they'll be shot at, and they need to be able to have defensive systems that could protect them from this.
So you were go ahead.
I was going to embellish just a couple things that Bob was talking about. The ANS, the Astro Inertial Navigation System, as he said, gave us 300 feet either side of track. And to also try and, I guess, understand the speed relationship there, the rifle 30-06 has a muzzle velocity of just over 3,000 feet per second. At cruise speed, we were doing 3,200 feet per second, so we could actually outrun the 30-06. One of the other there was another GWAS thing, but I'll come back to it. So anyway, the next most important person in the pie, I think, was the RSOs from the pilot perspective, because they were the ones that received the mission that was already printed out for them. He'd run over the targets, the threats, where's the abort bases, and put all that stuff together. So the RSO, I think, was the next most important.
Usually as an operating crew, what you would do is show up the day before whatever mission you're going to be flying your task the next day, and you'd go through, and Bob and his office and give you the package. Here's the nav, this is where you're going, these are your targets. And you would just kind of dry run it on the ground. And like Bill said, you would figure out where am I going to abort to, or next abort base, or whatever, all the way along. The more time you spent on the ground was less time you had to worry about it in the air. You didn't want it to be a big surprise to you. So, and you'd spend 2 or 3 hours just table flying the mission and what you were going to do, and it made it quite nice. So all you had to do is go get in the suit the next morning, go out, jump in the airplane, because your buddy crew had all pre-flighted it for you. You just jump in and it's all set up and ready to go for you. And I had 429 hours in the airplane. I never once updated that navigation system. It was so bloody good and so reliable. I was just blown away at the accuracy.
it was hard uploaded into your system.
That tape that he was talking about that they build, they bring it out and just put the tape in and it loads it right up. We all, in the front cockpit as well as the back, we had a little traveling map screen that would show up, and you could see that you carried paper maps and stuff, but you didn't want to have crap like that in the cockpit, so it was nice just to use this map going. The pilot had a little smaller one, but the back seat, we had one, and it kept right up with you, and it showed you, it was just great for pacing and all that. And the sensors were all automatic. Bob's built in all this good stuff, but we knew what it was supposed to be, how angles, what it was supposed to be looking, and you'd watch it, and you made sure it came on. Was it pointing in the right direction and stuff? And so it was a coordinated event. It took a lot of effort from a lot of people to make it all happen, but it did.
Barry's front seater, Lee Shelton, who was a brilliant guy, had tremendous command of the language, and a lot of it was very, very humorous. But he was my instructor as I was going through training. And Lee had a fun saying that the ANS was so accurate, you were either on the line or in Bolivia. There was nothing in between. So, and he was true. I think I had one ANS failure, and sure enough, you know when your is not working.
And there's nothing worse than being lost at Mach 3.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You're traveling so fast, to manually do this, it wouldn't have been possible. Now, if something did go wrong, the RSO did have a checklist and could say, okay, point the camera here and turn it on at this point and turn it off at this point, and hopefully we get maybe 10% of what we were originally going for.
And that was customized then for each trip.
Each
So that
each mission.
checklist, because I keep hearing the term checklist, and I keep thinking of, gear down and that kind of stuff. But this
Checklist was
is,
about that big.
Yeah, and the RSO is the one that really managed the checklist and the pacing. I had checklists, but they might as well have been crayons, because I mean, our job was to pointy end forward, and let him tell you when the timing and the pacing of the mission was.
so you were once the data was uploaded into the aircraft, and you were flying. Once you got up to altitude, was it basically autopilot then to stay on that course?
Oh, you went on to autopilot as you came off the tanker. So you finish your refueling, you're in burner in one engine, you disconnect as you slide off to the other side of the tanker, whichever way you're going. You light the other afterburner, you're running some post-AR checks, and wave goodbye to the tankers and start your acceleration. And you are on your the ANS, if you will, or on track at that point. And that takes you, and then you do your acceleration and get up stable to Mach 3. But the ability to hand fly, I've heard a couple of guys mention that it flies beautifully. Well, it does, but you can never do it in a mission.
That's good.
I used to, just for the demonstration purposes, used to get up on a training mission, and you'd finally finish your refueling over Idaho and get established going eastbound, I guess, through North Dakota. And if you can envision back in your Cessna 150 days, if you will, an instrument called an HSI, a horizontal situation indicator, and all it was is it had a line that went this way, and full scale deflection was 1 mile in the SR, and then 1 mile this side it would watch. And so every 10th you could tell as it's going off course, you'd kind of nudge it back and forth. But I'd tell the student to we're going to turn the autopilot off, so just keep us, aimed forward. Watch your ASI. Don't do anything. Just watch your ASI. So on, hand flying, he'd punch the autopilot off, and you'd see the HSI go. And so you'd make a little slight correction to the right, and it'd go, and you were off. I mean,
Then
you
you were
lose
way
it
up.
in a heartbeat. So back on the autopilot quick.
Wow.
That's
Wow. And
incredible.
I think that kind of got lost in the sauce for me here. And again, I hear the beautiful, feels good to fly it, but to run the mission,
You couldn't do an operational
couldn't do
mission.
a mission.
No,
That's
you could find
amazing.
Europe, but that's about it.
It looks like it.
Yeah, it's dirt.
I think it's there. So I got to say that when I see the data cards there, it reminds me of my time in the data center punching cards out for Fortran. And you must have been pretty good, because about every 5th card for me, I made a miscalculation. So I don't know how you got it all in and validated that.
And you didn't want to drop them.
Right. Oh, right.
Scatter them across
If
the
you're-
floor.
we're on a big
Not
mission here.
52 card pickup anymore.
You don't want to drop that. Tell me a little bit about the and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the bases, I hear the term TDY, and I think that some of them turned to permanent, or
Yes.
how did those things get established, and what was the significance of those, maybe relative to where they were going?
Yeah. Like Okinawa was a PCS assignment a long time ago. It was set up really for Vietnam. And A-12s overflew Vietnam, but then the SR-71s overflew Vietnam. And you can see there's a picture of an SR-71 overflying Hanoi, and you can see the rocket, the SA-2 contrail below it. You know, they were shooting an SA-2 at it, and beautiful picture of that. So it could fly over a combat zone and be pretty much invulnerable. So missions in the Americas over Cuba were out of Beale, or out of Nicaragua were out of Beale. But the missions in Europe, they were TDY. They became PCS because the Soviets in the late 70s were transitioning and developing new submarines that were being deployed differently than previous. The earlier Yankee-class submarines, the Delta ones, were in the Atlantic Ocean. The Yankees were off the East Coast. The Deltas were south of Iceland. And we could have our attack submarines shadow them and keep track of them. This was of key interest to SINCSAC because these submarines were targeting SAC bases. And in the you had about 30% of SAC aircraft on alert status. They had to be able to take off within 15 minutes. And in some cases, they may have less than 15 minutes, depending on the position of the submarines. The newer class submarines that were being developed, the Delta IVs and the Typhoon class, had a new class of missile. They could actually launch from within the Arctic Circle. They didn't have to get into the Atlantic Ocean. And therefore, it became a bastion. They were protected by the Soviet attack submarines. It was difficult to get at them. And the Typhoons could actually sit in port, and we knew certain positions within port, they were actually sitting on alert. They could just launch from port. They didn't have to deploy. So we needed to know who was sitting in port, where they were sitting, and we needed to know that more than just once a month.
Okay.
You know, so we set up the DET as a PCS assignment so we could fly at least 2, maybe 3 times a week. And we'd fly this in combination with the Baltic and the Federal Republic of Germany along the border there. And then we did other missions into the Mediterranean. But that was the initial reason why we became a PCS assignment.
And that was, again, just for those guys, the pilots and navigators who were TDY 45 days at a time. We do 45 days in England, come home for a few weeks, then go to Okinawa for 45 days, come back home and hop back and forth.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, the PCS was the mobile processing center. The vans where we could process the film, the take from the SR-71. So the OBC camera could have over 10,000 foot of film that you'd have to develop. The tech cameras had to be developed, and then the radar needed to be correlated. So all of this needed to be processed. The ELINT needed to be processed. So the DET would do this in England, and we would put out an initial report. And then we would make dupe positives and dupe negatives copies of everything, and they'd be sent back to Beale, or they'd be sent to DIA headquarters, or to, in case of the support to the Navy in the East Med, we sent copies down there. So that they could do second phase, what we call second phase and third phase report, where they're looking deeper into the film to see what else they can get out of it.
So we talk about, it's a kind of, we were talking about uploading and downloading. So you were talking about that a little bit, and that's
that
in the 90s.
Remarkable.
But so most of this, when we're talking about the images that were captured by radar, and you mentioned another camera that was changed out in the front of the nose there. Was those images all captured on film per se?
Yeah.
So it must have been some logistics involved in getting 10,000 feet of film and getting it developed, and then you had to get it, when you say send it over, it wasn't like in today's world where you press the send button probably. So how did that kind of stuff take place in a timely fashion? I mean, how did it?
Well, as soon as the plane landed, maintenance was pulling the stuff off the planes and taking it over to the MPC, and they'd start the processing. And then as soon as it's processed, it would go over to the PIs to start doing the interpretation. That's the ELINT also would
time.
be analyzed, and then the reports would be sent out. This was done quite quickly, but again, 10,500 feet of film.
Well, I would
takes a
think
while.
that still almost sounds like it's days, not hours.
Well, it was hours.
Oh, it really was, huh?
Yeah.
But still, the user is out there wanting to know now.
No, right,
And
right.
so
They want to know what's over that hill, like you talked
Exactly,
about,
exactly.
and to have it quickly.
We would be working. I mean, as long as it took. I mean, you could be working overnight. It depends when the film came in. I mean, you worked until you completed the mission.
Right.
And the kicker is you did the take or the photographing or whatever, and then you still had to come back. We fly like the speed of smell, but you still got to get back there and get down. So that's all time. Where with the data link, God, it was so nice. It was just instant, and they
Made up quite a bit of difference.
did big time.
And one of the things, I guess, in all of, as I heard your different stops in the process, the secrecy of everything. Everything you talked about, the Maxwell Smart thing with going through the doors, which I think was a great. I can relate to that. I can just see how that might happen, but keeping everything again with hard copies and how you did it and how you communicated, because it sounds to me like once you evaluated your team evaluated the film and stuff, there was reports that are going out, and or maybe there are phone calls that are made, or how do you what was your biggest security threat, or how did all
Well,
of
we
that?
had secure communication systems, and we could send reports out, and secure. We had what we used to call it the OPSCOM machine, as a teletype, and you could directly contact with SAC headquarters, and it's a keyboard, and you sit there and type out your message, and then they type back, and there was also secure phone systems, which were nothing like today.
It was
But
very difficult to do international, even with our special systems and stuff. It was just backlogged and clogged and the limited lines, and so it wasn't as timely, certainly, as today.
I just it's fascinating because I remember some of that first, just in kind of the business world, a little bit of getting on a machine like you're talking about and just having some text back and forth, some communication, and how far ahead you were in front of that on top of everything else, while the rest of the civilian world was picking up on some of it. But today's world, I guess, it's a completely different animal on that.
The secure phones would have a box like this, and you'd have to change the cards every day. Each day would be a new coded card, for the secure phones. This is intensive.
Now they have free copying, and it just
Yeah.
keeps going.
Talking about the dissemination of information from a crew dog point of view, we really generally didn't get too involved post-mission, generally moved on, but distinctly recall, and Bob, you might have been on station at that time, but Tom and I flew the double leg where we went up and did Murmansk, came down, revealed, and then went into the Baltic. And so we did our Baltic run and came in, landed. So early the next morning, we got called from the PIs going and say, hey man, you guys got to come over and see this. This is pretty cool. So we go over and they've got the film all laid out. And what they had captured was two West German F-104s blowing down the beach in East Germany, just blowing umbrellas and lawn chairs everywhere in East Germany, in the wrong country. So we blew them up into big pictures and sent them over to USAFE to send them to the Germans, saying we're keeping an eye on you. So every once in a while you pick up a little bonus.
Well, and tell me, so I can kind of appreciate the level of detail now with the different. I heard you say you could use radar when there were clouds involved.
Mm-hmm.
And when there were no clouds involved, you would use mostly
The optical part.
the optical part.
Yeah.
But you're up at 80-some thousand feet, and we're watching the the jets go across the beach.
Yeah,
Was it-
we're not seeing that, but the film is
yeah,
capturing
but how
that.
accurate, how much
We had,
detail do you
SAC
get?
had a weather bureau in Offutt. So we'd get accurate weather reports from them, and we'd know, what the weather situation was where we're going. Now, when you're going against the Kola Peninsula, mostly it's going to be cloud covered. That's when you're flying in the Med, it's going to be mostly clear. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
But those technical objective cameras, they were seeing, you could read, I think, a license plate from 80,000 feet. I
Yeah,
mean,
like
That's
two
kind
foot
of put it in
resolution.
that's
something
the
I can
fidelity
relate
that
to.
you can see. Now the
Yeah.
radar, the advanced one we got was just even. It was almost photographic. I mean, but you couldn't read a license plate with the thing, but you could see positioning down to.
And they could tell
Quite a few
which
inches.
subs in
Yeah.
port. Not that a sub is in port. They could tell individual subs, oh yeah, that's number whatever.
And that's how we kept track of that type of thing. And
Yeah.
I wondered about I don't have a feel for, but if you tell me, I'm not sure I could read the license plate across the room.
I can.
But if you tell me you can pick that up with the analysis team, that's
But
pretty
to show you
amazing.
how concerned the user gets, the satellite, one of my last flights was 10 and a half, but it was from Beale because the satellite had gone down that was normally tracking some of this stuff in addition to, the debt was gone, so we didn't have any means to track any up there, but the airplane was launched out of Beale, 10 and a half hours total, but we flew over to Vermance to check out the sub pins up there because the satellite couldn't pick it up and the Navy was just panicking that they couldn't figure out where this particular sub was or some sub. So it was in demand. And the beauty was satellites are predictable. They know when they're passing over. I mean, as they're in an orbit. So we weren't predictable. So they didn't know when we were coming or what we could do. So that was the other. And by the time they knew, and they'd pick us up on radar, it was too late that we were in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were a couple of incidents that gave away the capabilities of satellite
I was getting
systems.
involved.
Say again?
Yeah, there were a couple of incidents that were, one was Campbell's who stole a manual for the KH-11 and sold it to the Soviets.
Oh,
And another one was where some imagery was sold from satellite imagery. Well, you can take a look at a picture and you can pull data out of it and learn the capabilities, and that's like giving them a secret. That went public, and giving them the manual told them exactly the workings and stuff. So we used to, when I worked at Offutt as a photo interpreter, one of the locations I was looking at was Severn Events Shipyard. And we were watching the construction of a new submarine. And the submarines are built in a hall and they're covered. You can't see how it's being built. But there was a staging area behind where the parts would go into the hallway, and you could see the parts that are going in, and that you could calculate what's coming out.
Okay.
And then they would be brought around into a floating dry dock to a fitting out key, and then you could see the whole thing, and you could see how they're fitting it out. After these pictures and the manuals were released and the Soviets had them, they built a cover over the staging area so we could no longer see what was going in the hallway.
So they
Which
had
made
that
our
information
job much
figured-
more difficult to now figure out what was coming out at the other end.
So that's how they figured out that they needed to do something a little bit different.
Change
with
tactics.
that, yeah.
So,
And how did you coordinate? One of you mentioned about coordinating with other countries, other governments, and how was that it must have been a part of the planning. Obviously, we talked about how you flew the routes and stuff. How did?
yeah, we had a peacetime reconnaissance program 4 times a year. We'd have meetings. The attendees were the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, because they were all flying reconnaissance missions. So within us, we were coordinating, who's flying where and what we were taking. Then there were other collectors, British and French were collecting, and We flew what were known as combined missions, where we would fly the Brits would fly a Nimrod, let's say, into the Baltic. Nimrod's a SIGINT collector, and the Soviets would shut everything down because they knew this was a SIGINT collector, and the Nimrod would fly the loop, and as it's crossing over Denmark and leaving, the SR would be coming in, and they knew the SR could collect, say, Eland, but they didn't care. They were targeting the SR, so everything went up. They turned their acquisition radars on, the long-range radars. They watched the entire route. They were waiting for the SR maybe to cross over into, denied territory so they could try and launch something. They also sent their MiG-25s and MiG-23s, tried to get up to altitude, position themselves so that they could launch maybe, a missile ahead of the route of the SR. They couldn't catch it. You couldn't catch it from behind. But if you exploded something in front,
You might be able
the
to
SR would fly through the debris. That's the only way you could have taken it out. So while everything was turned on with the SR, we would fly an RC-135 at a low level, crossing the Danish Straits, sucking every radar up, everything they've turned on, and it'll be making a loop also, in the shadow. They wouldn't notice it, and again, all of this analysis goes into updating the defensive systems. This is a real cat and mouse game. They would change their frequencies, we'd have to change our frequencies, and it was back and forth. It was continuously being updated.
We did a very similar thing out of Okinawa, Japan, where we'd fly 2 SRs. One would refuel right after takeoff, or actually maybe that was the one that we'd do a 65,000-pound load, go right to altitude for a minute and a half, go right into the descent, refuel off of Hokkaido in the northern part of Japan. And then the whole objective was to come out of there and get up to altitude and speed and aim right at Vladivostok, make a right turn just as you come up on Sakhalin Island, and you would wiggle through an international pass into the Sea of Okhotsk, make a big turn, and just as you're coming out, here comes another SR-71 30 minutes behind it. And so they would pass virtually right over Sakhalin Island at the international borders. But meanwhile, the Soviets would be so confused that, again, they were throwing every electron up, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. So we did that like every year, or twice a year, or something like that.
Yeah, we had a mission in the Barents where we'd fly. Instead of doing our normal pass along the Kola Peninsula, we'd fly towards the Kola Peninsula and then turn. And they'd see us flying, and they'd think we're going to overfly it and go to Finland or something, and they would turn everything on again.
The beauty of the program is, as he mentioned earlier about PARPRO, was a peacetime aerial reconnaissance program. We were predictable, particularly. We had black lines. They knew the black lines. They knew where we were going to be flying. So when you did something out of the ordinary, like he's talking about, it was generally called a stimulator mission. We were the stimulator, and rather than going the normal black line where they weren't too concerned, but you go way up north and you start coming down, and they think, oh man, this is the overflight day, they're going to do it. So that's when they turn everything on. In the meantime, we've launched all these RC-135s out there, just sucking up all this stuff, and it was tricky in the cat and mouse game.
And I didn't, I'd heard a little bit about this approach. Obviously, it's well known in what you guys do, but that whole, as you said, you're vacuum cleaning to see how by getting that information, it helps you understand not only the wheres, but how they're using their intelligence or counterintelligence or defensive measures.
Yeah, well, it's our offensive measures that we're picking up.
Right.
That's to help develop our defensive.
So you'd really know what's
Well,
going
you do
on.
pick up that oddball tidbit that's over and above what the intelligence objectives of the mission was. And I was the one that asked Bob if he was in theater the day we picked up, 3.5 minutes of SA-5 active tracking, which was not part of the mission at all. The mission was, this was 2 days after the Beirut Marine Corps barracks bombing and killed a whole bunch of French and Marines, U.S. Marines. And so we were tasked a day and a half later. We took off, refueled off of Land's End in the southern tip of England. France would not give us overflight permission, so we had to go down the coast to France, Portugal, Spain, left turn into the Gibraltar, and descend down, refuel off of Sigonella, climb up across eastbound the southern tip of Germany and into Turkey. And we'd make this right turn, and just as we're making the right turn to line up with Main Street to Beirut, Tom in the back seat says, "Hey, I have SA-5 tracking." And I said, "Well, don't do anything but visually keep an eye out," because he could look underneath the airplane to see if any telephone poles were flying up at you. So 15 seconds later, he says, "Hey, I've got active tracking on the SA-5. I said, "Okay, well, don't jam, because we're doing everything we can really do to defeat an intercept, because it's an oblique shot. We're already doing 3.2. There's no way he's going to turn with us." So we finished the mission, turned over Israel, descended down into Malta, got the whole take. A hubris part of the story is, as I'm on the boom refueling, getting ready to go back out the Strait of Gibraltar and go back home, when we got a master warning light, teleprompter said it was right engine oil failure. So I was on the tanker. So I directed the tanker to turn us towards Sigonella, which I thought was our best abort base, and kissed the tankers goodbye. But I asked them to go up and orbit overhead until we're safely on the ground. So we're 1,000 feet on down when looking at the runway, and the light goes out. And, run the engine up and down, and light's gone. Well, I don't want to take the airplane supersonic again. So the fastest way home was to cut across France. So I asked Tom, "Do you have the charts to copy the tanker's route of flight home? And we'll go ahead and just fly that route and cut across France." He said, "Sure, I can do that." So we tell the Italian controllers that we're going to have an emergency and we're heading back directly to England. And they go, "Okay." And we get into France, and they said, "Who are you?" And all we would say is, "We're an Air Force tactical aircraft with an emergency." And that worked for most of the way across France, because here we are at 25,000 feet, 0.9 Mach, coming home subsonic. We get to this point, and Tom is in the back busy eating pudding or something, and kind of mouth half full goes, "Hey, look out the left window." And there's a Mirage 3 sitting on our wing. And he reads out, aircraft 957, state your diplomatic clearance number. And I asked Tom, I said, "I bet you we don't have one of those, do we, Tom?" And he says, "Nope." He says, "But don't worry about it. I already gave it to him." I said, "Well, what do you mean you already gave it to him?" "Well, I gave him the international peace signal." And I shot him one digit. And I said, "How long to the coast?" 2 minutes. Coasted out, came in and landed. And so we're in debrief, and we're talking about, "Oh yeah, we got the pictures and everything was right there. It was crystal clear. And oh, by the way, we picked up 3.5 minutes of SA-5 guidance." Well, the intel guys leaped up, they knocked over all their coffees and went charging off. And we ended up, we had never collected SA-5 active guidance before. And so this was a great opportunity, again, to tweak the defensive systems of all the European fighters and stuff. So it's just dumb luck.
Well, sometimes it's planning, sometimes a little luck probably that goes along with everything you do out there.
Just going along with the PARPRO stuff and even the special missions, Libya, when that kicked off, we were talking top secret on the phones back and forth, because they said the F-111s are out of Lakenheath, are planning to strike. Now, whether they can get permission from the Queen or the royal government, the MOD, to let us fly it, and I seriously doubted that they would let us happen, but we had to plan accordingly and be ready. And we were going to fly the bomb damage assessment missions to go down and do it. And finally it came back, and they had given permission for both the bombers coming out of Lakenheath and the recce from us and the Upper Hayford EF-111s that were flying as well, all to go. But the long pole in the tent that stopped us was France, and didn't stop us, but was France wouldn't allow overflight. They just said, no, we can't do that, can't do that. So we had to, that was the whole mission then. And for the 111s, it had to be catastrophically long to go all the way down the coast, the same flight he's talking about, and cut through the Gibraltar and go in and do it. Lots of chance for tip-off and everything, but it was a well-done mission. I don't think they knew they were coming, quite honestly. It was well done. And the other heartache for us was because of that wonderful radar system we had, we could pick up all this good stuff. But the powers to be didn't, because all this bomb damage assessment material was going to be released to the public so they could see what it was. They didn't want to release that. Our guys didn't want to release that information because it would tell how good our data was. So they made us fly with cameras. Well,
To get less information?
well, they were hoping we'd get the information and they could release it to the world. The first time we went down there right after the 111s had struck, the cloud cover. One day or the other was. One day was cloud cover. We brought the 2 jets back. We launched a spare to file it down there. The 2 jets came back and they asked the maintenance guys, can you turn them? And he said, sure. So we asked permission to go down and try it again and do it. And they said, go for it. So we launched the next day, same time, because of the sun angles and everything to get the good shot. And we got out there. This time there was a sandstorm that blew across Benghazi and Tripoli. So the 3rd day we finally got our cameras to work. However, by that time CNN's on the ground giving all the data out to the world anyway. But the point I was trying to make was about the permission from some countries. Sometimes they support you and sometimes they don't. But the Brits stepped up and took care of the situation, but the French chose not to.
We worked very close with the Brits. They were our backup. If we had any problem at the MPC, they could process the film for us. They had PIs that could exploit it. They could send reports out. For this mission in Libya, Lakenheath, our sister base, was a couple miles away. They had all the target folders. They knew what they were going after because they were, but we needed to know the targets that we were going after, and we needed to have the pictures, the imagery of what they looked like before, because we were going to do the bomb damage assessment to tell them how much the damage is. So we had the targets, but we didn't have the imagery, and they wouldn't share the image with us. It was too closely held, and they just would not share it. So we ended up getting the imagery from the Brits. And we were sitting at Milden Hall around a coffee table, and the Brits were handing us, this was U.S. satellite imagery that they had that was marked UK eyes only, and they were scratching out UK eyes only and handing it to us, and we were stamping it secret, no foreign. And we were shuffling this imagery back and forth across the table so we could have this data in order to do our part of the mission. I mean, they came through.
Amazing how some things happen.
That's awesome.
The trade of information. How did with all your missions, and I've asked a similar question to your other teammates, is a lot of secrecy, a lot of pressure, a lot going on, important mission for the country. But how did your this influence your family life? What kind of pressures did that add to the family?
Mine was an Air Force officer anyway, so she kind of
sorta
understood it. And funny story, real quickly, when they did the launch out of Lakenheath for the Libyan strike, they had done it, crafty, how they helped control the secrecy. They had done a recall, this was on a Monday morning, I believe, they had done a recall, bringing everybody in to upload, and practice, they called it. Practice upload to get the weapons on board, get it all set up, and it was just a normal, call everybody in. She went in for that thing at like 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, they loaded all this stuff up and then told everybody to go home. Well, here's the airplanes all loaded and everybody's going home. And the next thing they know, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, these things are taking off. And I had gone home because we were doing a midnight something launch. I had gone home and I told my wife, Terry, I said, do you notice anything different on these airplanes taking off? And they were all loaded up with weapons as they were going off the airplane. And we lived on base at Lakenheath where the 111s were. And she looked out, no, I don't see anything. I said, well, I got some weapons on there. Because I hadn't told her anything about what we were doing because it was top secret at that point. And so I said, well, there's some weapons on there. Well, they took off and came back and did it all. But so my family understood the situation being a military background. So.
And mine was a straight civilian wife. At the time when I came into the program, I was had been just married a few years, and we had no children at the time. And then as I progressed through the U2 and the SR, and we started having kids, so she was an extremely strong individual, good North Dakota girl who was had a fantastic family and a fantastic value system. Understood what I was doing and the importance, if you will. So I received, just fantastic support from her. And we made special accommodations for each other because our separation, we were gone over 200 days a year, TDY. Mm-hmm. So she was the boss. But we had a standard pattern that when I came back from a TDY, we basically spent a day or two together, and then she and all the wives that were with the other guys that were gone at the same time, they would generally go off to Napa or San Francisco or something shopping, and darn the luck, leave us with the kids.
Right.
So we got another great chance for them to get a breather, and us
You to
again a
connect.
chance to reintegrate into the family. So
Most of them were pretty understanding.
yeah.
At that point in our careers, they had kind of seen a lot of.
Well, this is this is part of the drill.
Yeah.
Even though acknowledging that, I gotta, I know this is you got to have successful aviators. I find have successful, a strong family support.
And after 7 years, 3 in the U2 and 4 in the SR, we now wrestling with 2 3 and 4 year olds. She kind of came to me and said, "This would be a good time for you to get out of the program and stay home."
Mm-hmm.
And I was happy to do that.
Yeah. Any stories?
I was single at the time, so it didn't matter. And because I was single, I got all the TDYs. So I spent probably as much time in Germany or in Italy as I did in England.
Nice.
Okay. So you were a good candidate for your supervisors or whatever. Say, let's send him over there because he can get away from the family chores. Is there any specific mission or operation? We got some good stories from 2 or 3 of them there, but anything that comes to mind that sort of just again highlights the teamwork, how it wouldn't have happened without the right team together, the synchronization of the operation, anything that strikes you? Probably every day. I'm sure that was the case, but
We had a mission on Christmas Day. It changed from the day before Christmas to Christmas Day, and Colonel Murphy was in charge of the dead at the time. So I was not there that morning. I was dressed up in a Santa's outfit. I was waiting outside the conference room. And you go through the maintenance and you're getting ready for the intel brief. And when they did that, I had another person in there taking my place. I swing the door open and I say, "Ho, ho, ho, Merry Christmas. Have you been a good commander?" And I get this look like, "Who the hell are you and what are you doing in my conference room?" And that's cleaned up, And I walk up to him and I give him a lollipop, and then he recognizes me when I get closer. And I give the briefing. You know, the threats are here. This is
Right.
what you're doing. So then he took me out to the flight line because the tankers are taking off now. The tankers take off much earlier than the SR. They got to get in position, and the
Sure.
SR will meet them there. So I'm out on the flight line. I'm waving the tankers off in the Santa's outfit. You know, it's a little chair. And then I had the opportunity to sit in the cockpit. You know, sit there with the Santa's outfit, but the flash. You got to remember, it's a flash camera at the time.
Right.
And the flash didn't go off, so the picture never developed. You know, so unfortunately, there's no picture of me sitting in the Santa's outfit in the cockpit.
What a shame.
With all the technology that you got working from, when I hear about that, it's like, it's sort of like those, you know, it's like last night when we heard about the $15 fuse that
For the door.
$2 fuse or
$2 fuse.
Yeah,
whatever. I'm not sure there was really a fuse involved, but I made a good story in that whole
It
process.
did get us out of the hangar.
the hangar door, getting the hangar door open last night. But
Oh, that's funny.
it turned out to be good.
He recovered well.
Yeah, no, they
Oh,
really.
he was a brilliant sense of humor.
Yeah, he really kept everything going. Maybe just a couple more things, but is there anything I'd like to just kind of hear from individually? You know, what if people are watching this? We've got a program that was just super successful, and it all happened because of great teamwork and just really qualified people doing the right thing for the right cause and helping our country out. But is there a thought you'd leave our audience with, I guess, on what was your favorite part about being associated with the SR-71 mission? And anybody can
You
jump in
want to
first.
I think just the fact that there was such an incredible aircraft designed in the early 60s, late 50s, that you were part of the team, and you realized how wonderful that aircraft was, and it took a team to get it all up, from the maintenance, intelligence, the ops, the everything, that it was a family. And we used to have Blackbird reunions every 2 years to get people back together and see each other. And the numbers are dwindling, so last year was our last reunion. But there's so many people that show up that you haven't seen forever, and you realize how good that bond was with the maintenance, the contractors. We had so many contractors that supported the airplane, not just Lockheed, but all these people, and it was just one big happy family. And because of that, and it was a very small fraternity of lucky guys that got to fly it, and so we're just grateful to see each other, and it was a family team effort.
Yeah, I would totally echo what Barry said. You know, when you got involved in the program, one, just from the interview, you know, all the way through training, you continue to see how you gel into this organization that is just such a tremendous group of individuals, from the junior enlisted guys all the way up to the 06s that supported each other. You know, you'd normally go into a squadron and you meet the commander and all that stuff. And the first exposure I had to both the U-2 and the SR was when I came out to interview for the U-2. And we had a briefing room, and then we each had a squadron bar on either side of the briefing room. And I was actually just an interviewee sitting in the very back, kind of watching what's going on. And the wing commander comes in and starts telling both the U-2s and the SR crews there that this is what, and we got to do this. And all of a sudden, you know, some majors, you know, said, "Oh, that's bullshit." And some other guy said, "We're not going to do that. Why would?" And you know, the F-bomb started flying, and I'm sitting back here going, "Jesus, they're all talking to the colonel this way," but everybody took their rank off when we started talking about the mission. And it was, well, how do we get it done smart and nobody gets hurt and we get the take? And it was a lesson.
Well, that's the other thing. One of the things that enlightened me. I had been in B-52s, been to Vietnam, so we had done some real work. But in B-52s and most of these other outfits, you sit alert. and you never do what you hopefully what you're trained to do. This airplane, somebody wants you to do something, and they want it. It's you go out and do what you're trained to do, and it's delivered at pretty high levels. Most of the stuff that was given, that made me feel proud, and I think that's the pride factor in there, that you're doing what somebody wants.
Yeah, executed a real mission.
It made the tour in England really good, because you've got to remember, this is Cold War. This is NATO base. So we were a SAC detachment on a Mach base in NATO. And now most bases, the guys would be walking around in their MOP gear at least once a month. You'd be going through a monthly exercise, as if you were in a war situation. But we had a real mission. And Mach didn't play that many NATO war games because they had a real mission. And we had a weekly mission. So we had a low profile. You get to the base, you do the gas mask, and you'd learn how to use all that stuff. But once we were there, we didn't have to play any of those games. We had a real mission. Mm-hmm. And the thing that stands out to me is the program not only kept the Cold War cold, it allowed us to know what was going on the other side so we wouldn't make mistakes. It saved lives, because we were flying missions in the 50s that were overflying the Soviet Union. And those missions often ended up with planes being shot down. There were some 40 planes, give or take, that were shot down in the 50s and early 60s, doing reconnaissance missions, trying to confirm whether there was a missile gap or a bomber gap, whatever the situation was. But Air Force, Navy, Army, lives lost. About 200 lost in that period. With the SR-71, we could overfly a combat zone and look at the SA-2 below us and know that the SA-10 or the SA-5, where they can get to 120,000 feet, they'll probably be behind us. Mm-hmm. So.
I had one of the guests at the dinner last night that was civilian, and he said, reconnaissance, what did you guys really do? And I said, well, there was occasional things where we were looking for real targets or something, real bomb damage or something like that. But I said, most of the time it was monitoring, and like the submarines and all that good stuff. We were there as a monitor to make sure they didn't change or do anything that we weren't expecting. Or sometimes it was just for a political purpose, because we leave a pretty good boom as we go over. As a political thing, we're watching, we're still here. And that was kind of the Cuban situation, I think, most of the time.
Yeah, it's what I hear. It's a pretty interesting perspective. Your mission and what that plane was designed for, you exercise those skills every day.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you had it and we're waiting for that one time we got to go into this one bombing situation, whatever it may be. You and all aspects were continuously exercised. It wasn't a sitting in wait type situation. Mm-hmm. Did you real quick on just kind of curious? I wanted to ask you about flying the U-2 versus this, and what was the comparison?
Right.
I'm just kind of curious.
The U-2 was really unique in the sense that you were single seat. Average mission was 9+ hours. They did a good job keeping us out of high threat situations. So we would do standoff, but we could do all the DMZ, we could do all the FRG in Poland, and keep track of all the Europe stuff. But it was all at 0.72 Mach at 67,000 feet, which means and they had an airspeed indicator that sat up here that a blind man could read. And you were supposed to be at like 92 to 93, 94, but it was because the U-2 had a very narrow stall overspeed window. The new R models and stuff like that with the big engines is maybe a 25-knot window. You either overspeed 25 or stalled and lose the airplane because the tail falls off on those things. But it was a great mission because you were, kind of on your own doing your own
I was
thing.
going to say, yeah, by yourself.
Yeah,
different.
went to the SR. Luckily, I already had 3 years experience of flying in the pressure suit. And so the training was also top notch and so well done due to Lee being such a great instructor. And you get used to the go fast. I mean, they said, boy, just you feel that speed. No, you really don't. Takeoff, you do.
I bet.
Takeoff, you're a passenger and trying to keep it, down the middle till it's time to pull back. But to fly the airplane, it was like a big, heavy fighter. We had a 2G limit, basically, so we had to be very careful on yanking and banking. So the airplanes, although were so different speed-wise and operationally wise, the mentality you went to in carrying out the mission was pretty much the same.
Same.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Anything else that from an operational perspective that there's so much to talk about, I know. So I want to say, oh, that's it. We got it all covered. But for with the time we have and the group, is there any other thoughts on the operational side of the success of SR-71?
One of the things we were concerned with was operational security, OPSEC we call it. And when I got to the det, there were a number of things that kind of let people know we were going to be taking off. So you turn the radios and testing the radios and communications, make a couple hours before a mission, that sends out a big signal around, that there's something going on. We used to get a lot of people at Milton Hall lined up along the fence line to watch us take off.
And we took off either on time or 50 cars lined up. That was our criteria.
So we had several refueling areas because when the plane takes off, it's not fully loaded, and it would meet a tanker and fill up and then go out. So what we did is we combined the refueling areas into one location, because previously, if we were refueling here, we're going this way. If we're refueling there, we're going that way. But by having one location, you knew the plane was up, but you didn't know where it was going to go until it actually went in that direction. By testing the radios every day and at different times of the day, you didn't know if that was a day you were going to fly. So we did things like that to kind of minimize, help the security to minimize our signal out to the world.
To throw people off a little.
We didn't talk to anybody. We would start in the hangar. We had a guy in the tower. We'd flash our lights. He'd flash our lights that were cleared to taxi, and we'd taxi out, get at the end of the runway, get all our stuff done, flash them when we're ready for takeoff. They'd give us a green light. We'd take off. We wouldn't talk to departure. We wouldn't talk to anybody until descending through 60,000 coming back in. So that was another way that we kept everything pretty much in-house.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. I thought it had a little bit of that same mindset, I guess, just recently with some of the B-2 bombers heading one way and the lack of communication and keeping all that stealthy at the end. Very, very cool.
Only in the training sorties did we actually talk to the en route air traffic control people, and then when you went above 60, you shut off the mode Z, which was the altitude readout. And so they could track us and they knew exactly where we were and everything, but you didn't have to talk to them up there. They would just transfer you to the next section and whatever. But that's a good point Bill was making about the total radio silence. On an operational sortie, you never had to talk to anybody.
And I guess the only people you might talk to, how did you deal with the tankers then? Were you?
It was also a discrete we could detect where they were and range, but it was all encrypted. Encrypted.
Oh,
When you hooked up with the boom came into you, then you
could talk
could talk to the
to
tanker.
the tank.
Nothing went outside. It was just between you and the
Okay.
tanker. But the rendezvous and everything was all radio silent. Bless their hearts, those guys were always. I never had a problem being where they were going to be there.
The Norwegians were pretty good at keeping track of us because it was not uncommon to come down after doing a Murmansk loop and come over the top of Norway and down near to Bodo or wherever it was. And you'd plug in, and then the next thing you know, you had 2 Norwegian F-16s on the wing watching you refuel. And we had 3 tankers, so we'd tank 1, we'd tank 2, and leave the third one we generally didn't need, but it was an air spare if we need to get more gas. But I remember one day I finished and I kind of went out, and then one of the Norwegian F-16s went into the slot like he was going to get fuel. The boom operator wagged the boom left and right and stowed it. So then we all got out on the left wing and looked at both of them and gave them the burner signal, and they all nodded. So I went into min-AB and started pushing it up to climb, and at about 38,000 feet, I hear click, 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 and look out, and they're all back. Wait, goodbye. So, but they did that quite often, their own practice, I guess, on intercepting and doing stuff. But they were having fun also.
Well, we landed up there a couple of times, so we were a tight knit group with the Norwegians.
Yeah, some landaways
At Bodo.
Very, very interesting. Because I've heard everybody say one of the technically challenging from a piloting perspective is the refueling. It takes a little bit of, I guess once you get good at it,
I found it, and I came to the program with no refueling experience, but I also taught formation, when I was in 38 instructor. And so I found it just the most fun thing in the world. The SR was difficult only in the sense that you had to run your seat full down, pull your rudder pedals up, and then lock your arm on your knee. And then over here, you're just nudging and playing with your power to stay in position. So I thoroughly enjoyed. I thought refueling was one of the nice part of the job.
Tankers were giving us about all they could for
I
airspeed.
bet you were
And we were at the back end of our airspeed limit.
I bet that was an interesting
Until we got to
balancing act.
Yeah, you change your weight 70,000 pounds basically over 15 minutes. And
Is that how much it took to refuel? About 15
we
minutes?
always wanted to be plugged in or going somewhere to land with 10,000 pounds. And if you didn't, then you were starting to get concerned. You want to get on the.
You get 6,000 pounds a minute coming in, so it was about a 15 minute to get an 80,000 pound offload, and we always filled it up full tanks.
Yeah, lots of times we'd stop the pumps, again with the intercom with the tanker, and the RSO was generally doing the calculation, and then they'd say, stop, give me 1 pump. And the idea was at the end AR, you got a pressure disconnect because you're full, and you slide out, light the other burner, and go. So there's no waste of time or gas getting back up to altitude.
Wow. Fuel management, pretty darn critical in what you're doing. And you're balancing.
CG.
Well, I appreciate you guys spending some time with me, and I'm not only here, but off stage.
Yeah.
You've been
a fun 3
very
days.
gracious hosts, and I've captured some really great content here, and I'm hoping to share your story and experience with others. So
Well, it was a great program, and you can tell we all loved it.
Oh.
We like to share it with people.
Love times 2.
Oh, big
It's really was wonderful, and it's clearly I hear it in the voice and the fabric of everything I've seen over the last couple of days.
Well,
So-
we appreciate you getting the word out.
It's
Thanks for
great.
the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you,
Wade,
Barry.
thank you.
All right, you guys stay with us. More to come.